I apologize for not being at the meeting. I have a class that ends slightly after the meeting begins. Just wanted to go over the proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year. The handout that Sam has given you shows the actual expenses for what we actually spent in fiscal 18-19. The columns obviously are pretty self-explanatory. I broke them out a little bit more detailed than we previously have. So you see AFT, council, taxes, and payroll withholding, the payroll column, travel, etc., etc. First row is actual fiscal 18-19 expenditures, the gross amounts. The row under that is what we had actually budgeted. So you can see that in some instances we deficit spent. In some instances we actually spent less than we had contemplated. Importantly, the row after that is the proposed 2019-2020 fiscal budget. And a lot of these are driven by the numbers that were actually derived from the first column, or actually first row, the actual fiscal 18-19 expenses, because some of those obviously are just not going to change by vast amounts. All the way to the right, you'll see the income. Only comment I'd make about income is that for fiscal 18-19, we took in a total of $489,884.89, and we anticipate taking in a little bit less this year, but that number is an unknown at this point. We don't know how many, for example, new hires are going to join the union. Just in the School of Business, we have several to many new hires, and we don't know if they'll be members or not. And so on and so forth. So we don't yet, in the first couple of months we'll have a better picture, but we don't yet know with any specificity what those numbers will look like, so it's safer to budget a little bit less. In terms of expenses, we've done, generally speaking, pretty well, with the exception of travel. We budgeted zero, and we spent about $11,500 on travel reimbursement, so that's an area that the executive committee is going to have to address and chat about and come up with a recommendation to the general membership. One of the discussions that was had at this point is the idea of, and it's reasonable for an organization to require some kind of pre-approval rather than just going on a trip and presuming that the local is going to pay for it. I know that seems a bit harsh to some, but just from a budgeting standpoint, this year we were trying to not run a deficit over the summer, and we were successful at that for a couple of reasons, but we were trying to not run a deficit, so tighter controls help us do these kinds of things. Generally speaking, we are in, at least on paper, a good position for this fiscal year, but let me explain why. By virtue of Sam's diligence and the something like $184,000 that Sam had noticed we had been overbilled by AFT over a series of years, and with Rabina's help they were able to put together what we believe is actually the amount owed to this local, and we have received a check from AFT in the amount of approximately $43,000. Now that's only partial, but we are using the difference between that partial payment and the amount that at least we claim is owing to cover the monthly dues. In other words, since about November, we have not been paying dues to AFT. So on paper, we look very good. We have not had to invade Vanguard, our emergency reserve, this summer, as we had to last summer to the tune of about $78,000. So we didn't have to do that this year. But that's only by virtue of the fact that we're not paying AFT. Come something like, I guess it'll be April or May or something in that area, we are going to have to start, because this amount owing will be eliminated by then. We'll have exhausted that. So we will have to start paying AFT again. When we have to start paying AFT again, we go back to deficit spending again. The deficit spending is in the neighborhood of $70,000 to $80,000 a year, which is why, given the reserves that we have, we're out of business in 2 to 3 years if you look at it on paper that way. So this year we're in good shape, but understand why we're in good shape. And being the seemingly perpetual harbinger of bad news, and I'm sorry for that, but the numbers are what they are, we still have to address this issue. I don't believe, can bring in enough new members to offset an $80,000 deficit per year. We can't cut expenses much more than Barbara has led us in terms of cutting this fiscal year. So we have to wrestle with our 2, possibly 3 big areas of expenditure: AFT, council, and our own salaries. I have an opinion on the salaries, as I'm sure we all do, and I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to articulate that here, other than to say Barbara made the argument that we can't cut salaries this fiscal year during the current term of the elected officers because the officers took the position based on certain criteria, which included the stipends that officers received, and it would be unfair to pull the rug out from under them, in the midterm. It's changing the rules mid-game. At least that's an argument. But that's even less the issue, because while we would save money and we would be closer to net zero instead of a negative, a deficit, the 2 remain, the 2 large expenditures remain, AFT and council. And unless and until we can either negotiate a more favorable deal or an alternate to that, and I'll leave that up to the executive committee and the membership to decide what that might be, but unless and until we can come up with something there, we will continue to deficit spend going forward, and that's a problem. So, net it out. Fiscal year 2018-2019, on paper we're in excellent shape. We've got a net positive versus a net negative. The net positive in the neighborhood of $65,000. Going forward, 2019-2020, we will probably certainly net zero or positive for the fiscal year, but starting fiscal year 2021, meaning next summer, since we're going to have to start paying AFT in that April-May timeframe, we're going to start running deficits again. So in essence, we've got a bit of a reprieve, and the membership has some tough decisions ahead. Financially at this point, again, you see the numbers. If you have any questions, reach out to me. I'm happy to get back to you. A couple of you have asked me questions about insurance. In the mess of papers that I inherited was not included any copies of the insurance policies, etc., so I've called and asked for those. Once I have that, I'll be happy to relay the information to you. Again, just keeping it short, so thanks very much for listening, and please pay attention to the numbers.